Welcome, everybody. We are going to give a few minutes for people to trickle in. But welcome and thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is Heritage Radio Network, and we are here celebrating the new rules of cheese and Saxelby's new book. So thank you all for tuning in. In the meantime, as we're waiting for folks to start, feel free to let us know in the chat where you're joining from. I am currently in Norwalk, Connecticut at my home. It has just started snowing. Love to know if it's snowing for all of you. There are, I think, probably a lot of folks here from the East Coast, and we have a big old snowstorm coming today. All right. Yeah, a lot of East Coast happening. Hi, we are bi-coastal though. I see San Diego, Jacksonville, Asheville, Denver, Pittsburgh. Wow, so many people. We've got Vermont representing, Tennessee, Vermont cheese, Dallas, somebody else in Norwalk. Hi. Hi to Greenwich. Hi, New Hampshire. This is really cool. This is a different format, of course, for us all to meet online, but I think it's such a cool opportunity that we all can come together in this way. So grateful to all of you for joining us. I'd love to give you a little bit of background about Heritage Radio Network as we are waiting for a few more folks to join. We are a nonprofit food media network. We are funded by support from listeners and partners, and we are primarily a podcast network. So we've got over 40 shows about all things food, drink, culture, and agriculture. And Heritage Radio Network has a mission to improve equity, sustainability, and deliciousness by changing the way that eaters think about food. So you can always learn more about us at heritageradionetwork.org. And we're really excited for tonight our star Anne Saxelby of Saxelby Cheesemongers in New York City to share recipes and insights from her new book, The New Rules of Cheese, a freewheeling and informative guide. So she'll be joining us in just a moment. And of course, it's a really special piece of our history that Heritage Radio Network was founded by Patrick Martin's Anne's husband 11 years ago. Anne started Cutting the Curd, which is our cheese podcast on HRN, which you can listen to on your favorite podcast listening app. And the link to the series is in the chat right here. We want to say a huge thank you tonight to our sponsor, the Vermont Cheese Council. You can buy Vermont cheese from Saxelby Cheesemongers, and to find cheese near you this holiday season, go to vtcheese.com/find to search for retail locations or buy directly from cheesemakers through their online stores. Later this evening, Anne's going to be joined by David and Yesenia Major from Vermont Shepherd and Marty Mundy from the Vermont Cheese Council. We're so excited to hear about the state of Vermont cheese and how we can support artisan producers. Thanks to our team behind the scenes, Kat Johnson, who's running tech, and Dylan Hoyer and Hannah Forden, who will be our moderators. Thank you to Books Are Magic for shipping Anne's book to all of you. If you haven't received yours yet, they're on their way, so check your mailboxes. Thanks to our location partner, Essex Market. They helped shoot the beautiful videos you're about to see. And thank you to our amazing interns, Armin Spengen and Alicia Chan, who edited the videos. They rock. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so happy to be celebrating your book tonight. And that was really cool to see you in action at Essex Market. How are you tonight?
Very good. Yeah, just finished up a crazy day of mail order cheese shipments here at our warehouse in Brooklyn. So this is like a welcome end of the day.
Oh my God. Well, congratulations. You made it through another day of holiday shipping. We are, of course, here to learn more about your book, and I would love for you to give us a quick intro about why you wrote this book and what you hope people will take away from it.
Sure. Well, I always wanted to write a book about cheese, but was never quite sure the right angle to go about it. But I feel like cheese is such an endlessly fascinating subject, and it's one of the reasons that I was so excited to start Cutting the Curd on Heritage Radio Network way back in the day, because I just feel like there are so many wonderful people in this industry who have so much great knowledge to share. And I've been the beneficiary of that. And when I have the chance to communicate that with people, whether it's behind the cheese counter at my shop, or doing trainings for restaurants and chefs and people who work in the service industry, people's eyes just like light up when they start to hear a little bit about the behind the scenes of cheese and why it's so special and what creates all these magical flavors. And so 10 Speed had started doing a series of books called The New Rules. So they did The New Rules of Wine with John Bonet, and they did The New Rules of Coffee. And they approached me and asked, did I want to write The New Rules of Cheese? And I was like, absolutely. And the format was such a great, I thought it was such a cool format, because it's basically 52 short essays that are really kind of wide ranging. And so I loved the ability to kind of like try to distill this information into little like snippets that hopefully people who know a lot about cheese will enjoy, as well as people who are just getting into it. Oop, I can't hear you, Katie.
Is that better?
No. Oh yeah.
Okay. We gotta love 2020 and all of our video hangouts. And can you tell us about how it's going operating your retail shop in Chelsea Market and doing online sales? And while you do that, I'm gonna drop off because it seems like my internet is a little sketchy, but thank you so much. I'm gonna hand it to you to talk about the state of retail, and then I'll let you talk through the cheese video.
Absolutely. So yeah, 2020 has been a wild year, to say the least, for cheese sales, both for, for cheesemakers, for dairy farmers, for retailers, and everybody in between, restaurants, chefs. So I feel like everyone has had to pivot. That's like the annoying word that everyone says all the time nowadays, but everyone's had to pivot a million times and throw lots of spaghetti at the wall to see what is going to work and how to keep these businesses afloat. So for our business, before the pandemic hit, we were probably 50% retail, 50% wholesale. We have our shop in the Chelsea Market, and then our warehouse here, we do wholesale to restaurants and other cheese shops. We also do mail order. So it was about 50% retail, 50% wholesale, and mail order was like a drop in the bucket, not even worth mentioning. So overnight, our wholesale sales basically disappeared because most of those were to restaurants. Our retail sales basically disappeared because we're in the Chelsea Market. And the two people that shop at the Chelsea Market are the two kinds of people: are tourists or people who work in the building. And so both of those groups were gone as well. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, our mail order business really kicked in, and people started to find us online, which was really a godsend. And it's just been a crazy whirlwind year, but I feel like we're back to the point where we've been able to find channels and ways to get the cheese out there, whether it's to the other retail shops we sell to, through mail order, or restaurants have been incredibly innovative and creative. And my heart goes out to all the chefs and all the people who work in the service industry who are just trying to make it work nowadays. And people have gotten really creative, but it is definitely tough. So if the video is queued up, something we wanted to show you guys tonight was a little video of how to make a holiday cheese board. It seems like making cheese boards is kind of like all the rage these days. There's, cheese influencers, which is a thing, which was like never a thing before. And kind of, cheese boards have become both a way to enjoy delicious food, but it also seems like kind of a way for people to take care of themselves during these crazy times. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, but if you can sit down with some good cheese and wine and good friends or family, that's a really, it's just kind of a balm for the soul. So we wanted to show you how to make a holiday cheese board. And then we're going to also be talking with two of the cheesemakers that I work with, David and Yesenia from Vermont Shepherd, and Marty Mundy from the Vermont Cheese Council, just kind of about the state of the industry. So here we are with our cheese board. And I see someone doesn't have sound. I'm hoping that they can get it back. So when we're making a cheese board, one of the things that we want to do is assemble all the elements beforehand. And what elements do you need to make a good cheese board? Of course, cheese, you know this, but also things like crackers, dried fruits, nuts, you know, anything that's like that. So there's some pickles and just different elements, apples, jams. Basically, you want to have items that are going to create kind of flavor, different flavors, different textures, different colors, because it's about eating it, but it's also about looking at it. When the cheese board is, you know, has all these beautiful elements together, that's really when it's at its best. So what cheeses did I choose? I chose Harbison, which is a little bloomy rind cheese from Jasper Hill Farm in Vermont. Actually, all the cheeses on the board tonight are from Vermont, and I have to say my shop skews very Vermont-centric. Here we have Twig Wheel, which is a goat and cow's milk cheese from Twig Farm. We have Springbrook Tarentaise, which is a raw cow's milk cheese from Springbrook Farm in Reading, Vermont. We have, all right, Verano, which is a raw sheep's milk cheese from Vermont Shepherd. And we also have, finally, Bon Bouche, which is a goat's milk cheese from Vermont Creamery. And I wanted to pause it here because the Bon Bouche was exceptionally gooey. And I feel like sometimes people see gooey cheeses like that and they're like, oh no, that's got to be bad or wrong or something. But no, that cheese is delicious. So literally I had to take the box apart and flip it over and basically just scrape it off the bottom to get it into this little ramekin. But man, is it tasty. So even if you have like a gooey cheese, you can find a beautiful way to present it. Marty was asking if I always recommend doing a mix of cow, goat, and sheep for a cheese board. And yes, I think it really depends. Making the cheese board of your dreams is really about choosing the cheeses that you like the best. But when I'm making a cheese board, I like to try to choose different textures, different milk types, cow, sheep, and goat, different age profiles to really give kind of, you know, a broad spectrum of cheeses. I also like to try and do odd numbers. I don't know why. That's just what I like, either 3 or 5 generally. So here we have the Harbison. Oh yeah, and the names of the cheeses in the chat. I can definitely do that at some point during this conversation. Yes, Harbison. We had Springbrook Tarentaise, Verano, Bon Bouche, and Twig Wheel. So here we have the Harbison, and you need a centerpiece when you're making a cheese board. So the Harbison was my centerpiece cheese, and what I'm doing here is I'm cutting the rind off the top. Harbison is a bark wrapped cheese from Jasper Hill, so you can see the little spruce bark girdle around it, and you can basically cut the top off and then just like dig into it with a spoon. It is just delicious. Now the Tarentaise. So the Tarentaise is a firm cow's milk cheese, and so when I'm cutting these other cheeses, you want to when you're cutting cheese in general, you want to respect the geometry of the cheese. That's one of my little essays in the book. You want to try to make sure that everyone is getting an equal part of the outside or the rind and the inside. It's kind of like cutting. Think about it like you would cutting a birthday cake or something like that. The Tarentaise I chose to kind of cut into these little nice straight lines. I also cut the rind off, and that is, I feel like, you know, a little bit sacrilegious even for me because I love eating cheese rinds. The only time I don't eat a cheese rind is if it is bark, wax, or cloth. Otherwise, I definitely try it. But with this particular cheese, the Tarentaise, it's quite aged. And the rind can be almost a little bit too dry, too earthy. I feel like it's not really adding much to the flavor. It's a little distracting. So I decided to cut the rind off in this case. But you can always eat the rind if it's not wax, bark, or cloth. It's just up to you. The rind is basically like the crust of bread. It's just like the outside of the cheese. Can you save rinds for anything? That's a great question. You can save rinds, and you can save Parmesan rinds and make soup out of it. There's actually a recipe in the book for that. The rind on the Verano, which is the raw sheep cheese from Vermont Shepherd that is just being shown there, is delicious. The rind kind of tastes almost like a cellar or like dirt in the best possible way, if you could imagine something like that. I will also feed my rinds to my dog. if if I don't want to eat them myself, he's always very happy to oblige. Um, and no, unfortunately, you cannot order Parmesan rinds from us. You have to work at it. You got to like buy Parmesan and use it, and then just store them up. I keep mine in the freezer until I use enough, or until I have enough to make a soup. Some shops might sell Parmesan rinds, though. I know that the cheese shop that I used to work at, Murray's Cheese in the West Village, they used to sell Parmesan rinds for making soups. So here we're starting to arrange the cheeses here. So I basically started with Harbison, which was kind of arbitrary, but I feel like it's kind of like the wow centerpiece, gooey cheese. And then I arranged the other ones kind of, in a nice way around the edges. And I have to confess, I wasn't planning how to do this. I was definitely making it up as I went along. And just kind of starting to say, okay, I'll fill in the gaps here, fill in the gaps here. I feel like when you're making a cheese board, it's kind of nice to start with one element, like this salami, for example, cutting the casing off and cutting it up into these little medallions. And so I'm like, okay, we'll put the salami over here and see how that looks. I always like to include a little bit of cured meat on a platter. I also had some Casella's prosciutto, which is amazing prosciutto that's made here in the United States from heritage breed pigs that are raised on family farms in the Midwest. Some crackers, some spiced pecans for a little bit of crunch and a little bit of sweetness. I feel like especially with soft gooey cheeses, I love having a little crunch and a little sweetness. And then we have some apricots coming in here. And I was just kind of like looking at, okay, what needs a little bit more color? What needs a little bit more action? Got some pickles. It's always nice to have some acid and some brightness because cheese is a very rich, heavy, butter fatty food. And so having some apples and pickles in the mix there is just kind of a nice, refreshing burst of flavor in the midst of all that cheese. There was a question, how do you choose a proper cracker? And I feel like I'm spoiled because we get these crackers from Madison, Wisconsin called Potter's crackers, and they are so good. They taste like homemade, and they're buttery and crackly, and a little bit. They have a little bit of black pepper in them. So Potter's are definitely favorites. The Fine Cheese Company also makes some great crackers. But even Carr's crackers that you find in the supermarket, I'll use those. And then I'm putting some jam in there from Blake Hill Preserves in Vermont, another Vermont business. I chose the raspberry mostarda. I feel like raspberry is a lovely way to go with cheeses because there's a little bit of tartness again and acidity, and it's not so kind of bracing and sweet. And so yeah, arranged everything kind of like a little mosaic or a little still life. Kind of filling in the blanks as you go. And then finally kind of putting the tools out or setting the stage, for people then to just, dig in and create some carnage. And then finally a little shot of the book. And, and then let's see, let's pause for a second. What kind of cheese and chocolate pairing do you recommend? I love cheese and chocolate is a great thing to pair together. I like dark chocolate. We work with a company here in Brooklyn called Rocca Chocolate, and they make a bunch of interesting different flavors, like pink sea salt and bananas Foster and green tea crunch, and all kinds of things. So when we created pairings for those, basically, the R&D, if you can even call it that, was for us to all sit around with a bunch of different cheeses and a bunch of different chocolates and just try them all back and forth. And kind of come up with our favorite pairings. So if you want to find some cheese and chocolate pairings, I would recommend go to the supermarket, buy 3, 4, 5 different kinds, depending on how ambitious you're feeling, and then buy 3 cheeses or so, or 4 or 5, and just kind of try them all and see which ones you like the best. Because there's really no such thing as a perfect pairing. It's really subjective, and it's all up to you and what your tastes are and what you like. So I always love to encourage people to try, different things and discover their own favorite pairings. So now we're going to start wrapping the cheese. So I saved the cheese paper at the beginning of the video. When I unwrap the cheese, I save the paper If you can hold on to the cheese paper, if you buy cheese and it's wrapped in fancy cheese paper, that's great because it's designed to store it and to let it breathe. If you don't have fancy cheese paper, don't worry about it. Then I like to use either foil or parchment paper. I don't wrap my cheese in plastic at home just because I feel like the plastic will start to make the cheese taste like plastic, and it has kind of a stale, unpleasant flavor. So here we are wrapping up the cheeses afterwards. And these cheeses, especially the firm cheeses, will keep in your fridge for a very long time, longer than you would think. Hard cheeses can last in your fridge for, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. The soft, gooey ones like the Harbison or the Bambouche, maybe you'd want to eat those within about 2 weeks of purchasing them. But cheese doesn't go bad per se. Cheese is alive and cheese ripens. So you can kind of think about it like you would a banana on your counter. Some people like the bananas when they're a little green. Some like them when they're perfectly yellow. Some people like them with brown spots. And so cheeses are kind of like that as well. And the softer the cheese is, the quicker it's going to kind of go through that arc of ripening. A firm cheese is very sturdy and will hold up very, very well. How do you store the soft cheeses? So if I were putting this in my fridge with that little soft gooey one in the ramekin, I would just put a little bit of foil around that and just pop that in the fridge. You can put the cheese in like into a little cup or a little vessel and cover it if it's too gooey to handle, for sure. So I am so excited now. Well, thank you for watching the cheese board assembly. But now I'm even more excited to bring on David and Yesenia from Vermont Shepherd. Been making sheep's milk cheese in Vermont for 30 years. And Marty Mundy, who is the director of the Vermont Cheese Council, an amazing organization that supports Vermont cheesemakers. Hi, David and Yesenia. Oh, I think you guys might be muted.
Oh, now.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Are you working?
Yes.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys for joining us. I feel like you guys have the busiest schedule of all of us. In addition to making cheese and selling cheese, you're taking care of sheep and pastures and frozen water pipes, I'm sure. And yeah, so what is your season like right now?
Well, all of the above today.
That was today.
Today, of course, we've got this great big snowstorm coming. So we were lucky enough to be grazing the sheep at kind of remote fields that are like a couple miles away
from here. Mm-hmm.
So 2 big groups of sheep we herded along the roads and over trails back to the farm today, that took a good chunk of the day.
Wow. And was it
We're kind of just finishing up, actually.
And did you have your dogs to help you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we used Joni and Roxy for the first herd, 2 border collies, and then we used Roxy and her mother Cookie for the second herding.
That is incredible. Gosh. And how long does it take to train one of these dogs to really be able to do their job well?
A couple of years. They love to work, and so what we do is we train them in the winter when the sheep are maybe eating hay on the snow not too far from the main farmstead, and they're sort of in a controlled area and the sheep can't run too fast. And the dogs, you just start saying the commands as the dogs start doing their natural circling thing, and the dogs then start associating and come by to me, which means clockwise, and they just think of it like this, faster than you or I could.
I just got confused hearing it right now. I'm like, wait, which way would I go?
She's like, am I coming by?
Yeah.
Come by.
But well, that's amazing. Well, I feel like just the little bit that you just told us is so incredible, because most people who don't live on farms don't think about the weather and how that and kind of how that really has a big impact on your day-to-day operations, especially at this time of year. And sheep in particular are more seasonal than other animals. So can you talk to everyone who's here tonight about your sheep and when they're giving milk and when they're not giving milk and why?
Sure. How many sheep do we have?
500?
Around 500 sheep
Oh,
or
500.
so.
Mhm.
And we milk from during the pasture season from April to the beginning of November sometime. And we're in southeastern Vermont where when spring comes, it comes with a bang. It's a wonderful, wonderful part of Vermont. And so the grass grows in April and we can start grazing usually in mid to later April. And then during the winter, we are not milking. We're just feeding the sheep. The sheep at that point the biggest group is pregnant to lamb in March. And then all of the grandma sheep are pregnant to lamb. They're actually about to be bred starting on Christmas Eve.
Christmas, yeah.
And they will then, their gestation is 5 months. So then they will start lambing at the tail end of May and lamb into a good chunk of June. So during the winter, they're all pregnant. And we're feeding them. If it's stormy, we bring them in the barn. Otherwise, we feed them outside on the snow. And then mid-February, a lot of them come in, get shorn, and then start lambing in early March.
Wow. Wow. That's so cool. And so we had a great question come in about do you grow all of your own feed or how do you manage feeding the sheep?
We do, most of the year we're grazing them,
Right.
but then,
Even up until today.
yeah, today was the last day.
Today was the last day. We brought everyone home. So they've been eating grass that's left over at other folks' homes and pastures around us.
And then a lot of the work in the summertime is making hay to feed them through the winter. We use about the equivalent of 5,000 or 6,000 square bales or about 400 round bales. Yesenia is the main tractor driver for the haying. And so, yes, we make all our own hay unless for some reason the snow comes really early or stays really late, or it's a very lousy haying season, in which case sometimes we have to buy hay, but we usually don't. We do buy a little bit of grain, so that we do buy. We don't grow our own grain.
Got it. And so verano, which means summer in Spanish, is your summer cheese. And so while that cheese is being made, the sheep are out grazing in all of your lush, beautiful pastures. And one of the coolest things, for me as a young cheesemonger, getting your cheeses delivered was reading the little pasture notes about where the sheep were grazing and what they were eating. And it just like to someone like me who, grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, it just like sparks your imagination. And you're like, what? Like, that does make a difference. I never thought about that. Can you guys talk a little bit about how why the grass is important, all the different, how you guys foster biodiversity on the farm and the pastures, and why that's important to to your mission and what you do?
Well, those little stories that you got are real because we move the sheep that we're milking, the milkers, every 12 hours. Every 12 hours they get fresh grass in a different place, different pasture. Some of those pastures are south facing, some are north facing, some are level, some are wet, some are dry. They have many, many, many different species of pasture plants in them. And in fact, one time, quite a few years ago, a team of 2 people from Beltsville, Maryland, the U.S. Agricultural Research Station, came, and they did a little survey of a 10 square meter plot, and they found 65 different species of pasture plants in that little plot of ground. So it's a whole bunch of stuff, which many people would call weeds or herbs. It's grasses, it's legumes, it's dandelion, it's St. John's wort, it's clovers. It's just a whole ton of
Nettle, mother's warts,
right. It's a whole ton of different species,
ramps.
and the ones that are fat soluble, the flavors in some of them that are fat soluble wind up in the milk, and you can actually, in our case, we store the milk in milk cans. When we go to pour the milk into the cheese vat from the milk cans, you can smell
different
what the sheep have been grazing. So if those plants have fat soluble flavors that wind up in the milk, and it varies. It varies quite a bit, which makes the cheese variable, hopefully in a good way.
Definitely. Well, let's talk about the cheese. Carlin said, let's tell us, or Sue said, tell us about the cheese. So I feel like with cheese making, I feel like most people have a better general grasp of winemaking than they do cheese making. So, I always tell people that, with winemaking, you get a vintage every year, but with cheese making, you get a vintage every day or twice a day if you're making cheese twice a day. And so can you tell us about Verano and Invierno, your two cheeses, and how you came to make them?
Wow.
I know, just a simple
It was a
question.
long time ago. I think it was like 30. We started making the Verano, which we originally just called Vermont Shepherd, 33 years ago or something like that. And it was, I grew up on this farm. When I was a kid, we raised sheep for meat, for lambs, and for wool. And at a certain point, about 2 decades ago, or 3 decades ago, the markets for both of those were really not good. And so because the U.S. government stopped their wool subsidy, and New Zealand was sending lots of lamb to this country, and so we started thinking about other ways to make money from sheep, and the milking sheep came up, and kind of through happenstance than anything else, we tried a bunch of different recipes, and then wrote to Patrick Rance, who had wrote an earlier cheese book, a predecessor to your cheese book, Anne.
Such a good book. I love that book. It's out. I think it's out of print now, but if anyone can get their hands on it, The French Cheese Book by Patrick Rance.
The French
is
Cheese Book. And Patrick Rance said, you guys need to go. We sent him in England a sample of the cheese, and he said, you should go to France to the Pyrenees. And so he's the one who kind of, he said, because your cheese tastes the most like that. So we've been now several times. When was the last time we went? About
10 years ago.
10 years ago. So. And
when you originally went, it was
30 years ago.
Like 29 years ago you went.
So so that's how the cheese wound up being a relative of the cheeses made in the Pyrenees, both on the French side and the Spanish side. They're very similar recipes in the Basque area.
Yeah. And what characterizes those cheeses for everybody who might not have had them before? What would you say characterizes them?
Well, they're hard to semi-hard. Sheep's milk cheese. They are the curd, or the mix of curds and whey, is cooked just very slightly. They're not pressed terribly hard. They're aged, usually half a year or better. And they have become, in that part of the world, they're just the cheese staple. They're what everyone consumes.
I feel like, that was one of the first cheeses that I tried. Again, when I was first becoming a cheesemonger and learning about cheese, I tried Pyrenees Brebis, and it was the cheese where I was like, oh, I could eat this for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's so good. And I feel like there's something so wonderful and kind of smooth, buttery, a touch sweet, but not in a cloying way at all, almost in like a malty kind of slightly caramelized way about Verano and about your cheese. That is just it is so
That's,
tasty.
I was going to ask, can any of you talk a little bit about how sheep's milk cheeses maybe vary in quality from a flavor standpoint when you compare them to other cheeses for folks who've not been, who maybe not tasted sheep's milk cheeses before?
It's kind of interesting that sheep's milk is very rich, very, very rich. And it's high in fat. I mean, typically the fat content of sheep's milk will vary from 5% to 11%, depending on the lactation time. And, you know, but it is even higher in protein. So when you go to make cheese, which is sort of like taking the solids out of the milk, sheep milk, not all sheep milk cheeses, but a lot of sheep milk cheeses are extra high in protein and a little less high in fat relative to a cow or goat's milk version. So you'll notice if you try to make a toasted cheese sandwich out of our Verano, it's not going to work very well because it's so high in protein, it doesn't melt terribly well.
It's like melting a candle.
And so you're better off using our Invierno or some other cheese that
bubbles.
Right, that has more fat in it.
Not familiar. How is the Invierno different from the Verano?
Yeah, the Invierno is made to a similar, not exactly the same, but similar recipe to the Verano, but it's a blend of cow's milk from Elmley Farm, the farm at Putney School, which is just 3 miles from here, 4 miles from here, and our sheep milk. So it has a lot of cow's milk in it. It's a mixed milk tome.
And that was born out of necessity, right? Because your sheep make milk for such a short time during the year that then it's nice it's both practical, I guess, economically and scientifically to do that mixed milk cheese. Because when the sheep milk gets too high in fat, it's almost not suitable for cheese making, right?
Right. And the other thing is that in the fall, we have the sheep are all synchronized. They all lamb in the spring. By fall, they're all at the same stage of lactation, where the milk has become more like a vitamin pill for their offspring if they're still nursing than it is a full diet of water and nutrition and everything else. It's super rich. It's so rich. It's really difficult to make cheese out of by itself.
Right.
If you mix it with cow's milk, which is watery stuff by comparison, you get a perfect blend of milks, and so we can make the Invierno, which is that blend of sort of late season sheep milk and cow's milk.
Then we get to use all of our energy that we have to stop once we stop milking. It's like, what do we do?
Exactly.
What do we do with all of this stuff? We're so used to go.
Exactly. So, well, can you guys talk a little bit about the cheese making scene in Vermont? I feel like sometimes people ask me the question, they're like, oh, where to you are the best places in the US for cheese making? Because of course, we only sell domestic cheeses, but we really focus on the Northeast and New England. And Vermont is just like, pound for pound has more good cheese than anywhere else. Why is that?
I mean, I think of just our own town, and we have which is Westminster West. We have the sheep milk cheese. That's us. We have Parish Hill Creamery, which makes really great artisanal cow's milk cheese, and we have, what's the names of the people up in North Westminster? Goat's milk, cheese. Alpine Glow Dairy makes really nice goat cheese. So we've got just right here in the one little town in Vermont, we have all the cheeses. So the cheese scene in Vermont is pretty vibrant. and continues to be even through, I think, this COVID
Yeah, and it's
disruption.
I would say it's very diverse as well. Someone was just asking me the other day, they were saying, are all the cheesemakers sort of in one area? You know, are they near Burlington, for example? And they're not. So like if you look at the Vermont Cheese Trail, you'll see that they are really everywhere in Vermont. We have them in the southeast and the southwest. They're scattered all over the central and northern areas of Vermont, and they're really quite spread out. And we have right now within the Vermont Cheese Council, we have around 55 different cheese making members. And so those are different cheese making organizations. And we have some folks who have been making cheese for years and decades. And we've also, even this year, even with some of the challenges we've had, we've seen some new cheesemakers coming in to play as well. And so it's really exciting to see that really rich, diverse mixture of very experienced cheesemakers and newer cheesemakers. And so one of the things that we see within the state of Vermont really is this great shared experience and knowledge base. And I think some of that is that quality of what you see, and also a great, just a great feel for how the land and the agricultural community knits together with cheesemakers, I think is something that's really strong in our area as well. Yeah.
Now, we've gotten a couple of like health related questions. We can like jump around a little bit. So there was a question about, are certain cheeses lower in cholesterol than others? Is it true that goat and sheep cheese are easier to digest? I saw a question earlier in the chat about fat in cheese, and does cheese make you fat? I feel like I'll jump in and answer one of those, but if you guys want to tackle the goat and sheep being easier to digest, I would love to hear your thoughts. But my opinion is that cheese absolutely does not make you fat, because cheese, and of course
We're not fat.
I've drunk the Kool-Aid. No, and well, I feel like there's something to be said for, you know, getting 500 sheep in off a snowy hill that probably contributes to that too. But I feel like, you know, cheese is kind of one of nature's like original power bars. It's very high in fat, that's true, but it's also very high in protein. And consequently, if you eat small amounts of good cheese, you feel very satisfied. So I feel like a 2-ounce, you know, serving of cheese, that was actually the Roman soldiers' rations, you know, way back when they would get a 2-ounce ration of Pecorino Romano. And I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, that just wouldn't be enough. I would want to go like dive in for more. But it really is, if you have 2 ounces of cheese, you feel very sated. So I feel like the whole cheese makes you fat thing, I feel like it's probably the kind of cheese you're eating. Like if it's, you know, lots of melted kind of mozzarella in quotation marks on a Domino's pizza, maybe that's not so good for you. But then again, I would argue that that's not really cheese, because that's just milk that's been tricked into coagulating and melted on pizza. But okay, there, I said it. I got on the soapbox. But what do you guys think about digestibility of goat and sheep cheeses versus cow?
Well, we have quite a few customers who buy our sheep milk cheese in order because for digestion and nutrition reasons. There are some very faithful customers who just do that, and I think it's. I mean, my interpretation of it is that everyone is different, and by all means, the fat structure of sheep milk is quite different than the fat structure of cow's milk, and also even of goat's milk. It works for some people's digestion. I don't think that there's a blanket statement you can say about it being more digestible for everybody. It's just it definitely works for some people.
Right.
And then I do want to say something about the cholesterol side of things, and that is that animals that are grazing produce, and especially grazing certain types of plants like plantain, but in general, animals that are grazing have milk that is much better in lowering cholesterol than animals that are eating more processed food. Right. And that's not a particular surprise, since it's the same with us. If we eat more processed food, we're not as healthy as if we have more basic food. So, but if you want a healthy cheese of from any different species, see whether you can get it from grazing animals rather than confined animals.
And I'll just say on the digestion end of things, I know when I sold cheese, I would work with people who were looking for just different types of issues. And I would agree with what David just said. You know, everyone has a very different digestive system and has different sorts of needs. So there are some people, for example, who do better with goat's milk cheeses, some people who do really well with sheep's milk cheeses, and there are some people who only can do really well with cow's milk cheeses. And it does just vary quite a bit. There are some folks who are a little, I would say, less lactose tolerant. And I know I found very often those folks tended to do well with some of the cheeses that had some age on them. And it wasn't necessarily a lot of age. Like often it would be about 6 months or longer. Folks would be able to, if they were having lactose issues, some folks were able to tolerate some of those a little bit better. Just again, depending on their digestion. I feel like it's a lot of just trying different cheeses. And I know in my experience, at least, I try to work a lot with consumers. And I don't know, Anne, if you get folks coming in saying, do you have cheeses that have more lactose or less lactose? But I know I definitely fielded that question quite a bit.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, most of the lactose in, is removed during the cheese making process. You know, cheese making is a way to preserve milk. And so the lactose or the sugars in the milk are, eaten by the good bacteria during the fermentation process and converted into lactic acid. So there's very little lactose in finished cheese. So fresh cheeses like mozzarella, ricotta, burrata, those cheeses do have lactose in them because, again, most of them have not gone through fermentation. But any aged cheeses, people who are lactose intolerant should definitely be brave and try it. take a bite. I feel like, that was like humanity's dance with cheese. Like originally humans weren't evolved to digest milk beyond being infants, but some weird genetic mutation happened among Northern Europeans somewhere along the line, and that's why we could some of us can still drink milk as adults. But most people in the world would only eat fermented milk products after infancy, like cheese or yogurt or kefir. So there was a good question that I wanted to answer. Oh, someone asked, how can you tell if a cheese is grass-fed? Is it on the label? And I find this question so interesting because there are so many labels for food out there these days, whether it's organic or sustainable or cage-free or all these things. And it's very, I feel like a lot of these terms are very easily co-opted and then kind of used to mislead customers. So my answer about grass-fed dairy products, Organic Valley actually has a new grass-fed milk line, which, they have milk and I believe also, actually, I don't know if they have butter yet. But I mean, so there are some bigger companies that are like dedicated to this idea. But in general, I feel like knowing if your cheese is grass-fed is probably going to come from shopping small, like going to a small independent retailer, shopping at a farmer's market, buying direct from a small producer. Because,
someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, and because and those products are probably going to be more expensive as well, because to raise animals the right way and raise them on grass and do things kind of the good, fair, slow way, like the slow food mantra says, it just, it costs to do it. But in order to know, ask your cheesemonger or ask your farmer at the farmer's market.
There's a question that came up a minute ago that I wanted to ask. And I know I have an answer to this, but I would love to hear you both answer this, both of you groups. What do you wish people knew about domestic cheeses that they don't?
Well, there's a lot of domestic cheeses.
That's big.
Yeah.
Well, they're just.
I would say one thing is the variability.
Yeah.
That we have as much of a variety of cheese produced in this country as there is cheese produced around the world. At this point, we have a lot of variability, and I mean of types and origins, and that's something that is pretty new to this country. at least in the last half century. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Yeah, domestic cheeses. I mean, I feel like something that I think about is that I think that a lot of our domestically produced cheeses, especially those that are coming from small farms, I feel like are every bit as good, if not better, and more authentic than their European counterparts that are being imported. Because there are so many rules and regulations surrounding imports that I feel like a lot of imported cheese is just kind of like the dumbed down, version of itself that is ready for export. And it's pasteurized, and it's, it can sit on a boat for 6 weeks and not suffer. And so I feel like a lot of our cheeses are actually like, they're more special. They're more beautiful. They're made, right here by hand from beautiful raw milk when that's available to the cheesemakers. And so I think that that's something that's really exciting about domestic cheese.
Well, and I'll say the same. There's like if you think about there being 50 plus cheesemakers in Vermont, if each of those cheesemakers makes 3 cheeses to 5 cheeses, you're looking at 150 to 250 different varieties of cheese, just straight out varieties of cheese, and that's just in Vermont. And for folks who don't know it, I mean, you can find cheese made by small makers across the U.S. I mean, you can find them in Texas, you can find them in Nevada. I mean, they're tucked in all over the place, and it's a really neat industry that's incredibly broad, and it's just there's a little bit of it everywhere, and it's just this neat little nugget. And I will also say it's neat to think about things like we have certain cheeses in the US that are now winning international awards and things like that where people think about, oh, the great cheeses come from here, 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 and they're not always thinking about them coming from the US. And I would agree with what you said, Anne. We have some amazing cheeses coming from the US and many different places in the US. And so it's really exciting to be able to see that.
Yeah. And now I think we've got just a couple minutes left, but I see some questions coming in kind of related to where you can, buy good cheeses or buy even David and Yesenia's cheese. So I would definitely say there are a couple of websites that have put together good guides for independent retailers that support small farms. One is Victory Cheese. And we can probably put that in the chat, victorycheese.com. The Old Ways Cheese Coalition has also put together a really handy kind of like cheese finder for cheese shops in your area. And then David and Yesenia, we sell your cheeses online at our store, at our online store, but you can order direct from you guys as well, correct?
You can also look on our website and see what cheese shops in Connecticut or in Virginia or whatever carry our cheese. So if you have a favorite cheese shop, it's just
Right.
And our website does the same. We've tried to compile a list of cheese shops that sell Vermont cheeses, and there similarly there's a number of them across the U.S. that you can find on there as well.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, we are just about to wrap things up here. There was one funny question that came in on the chat earlier that I thought I would be fun to mention. Someone asked, how is Vermont cheese different than Wisconsin cheese?
I saw that.
Do you guys want to take a stab?
I eat so much Vermont cheese.
I know. What's Wisconsin? Yeah.
I'll speak to this a little bit. Years ago, I was traveling across the U.S. and I was visiting farmers and cheesemakers both and farming programs across the U.S. And I stopped into a cheesemaker in Wisconsin and talked to him a little bit about what his business was like. And he explained that he was a smaller cheesemaker. And in his region of Vermont, we talked about how much cheese he made per day, and he worked with about 12,000 pounds of cheese a day. And when we look at Vermont cheesemakers, there are many, many Vermont cheesemakers that might make, say, 12 to 30,000 pounds of cheese or less than 50,000 pounds of cheese in an entire year. And so the scale is very different a lot of the time. Not entirely. You can definitely find, again, small cheesemakers across the U.S., but within our cheesemaking community in Vermont, the majority of our cheesemakers make less than 50,000 pounds a year. And then we sort of jump up and there's sort of the 100 to 200,000 pounds, and then it jumps up a little bit more. So in Vermont, we happen to have, and this is true in the Northeast in general, we happen to have just a lot of very, very small cheesemakers in our community. So that's one difference. It's also great, but there's great cheese everywhere. Truly, you can find it all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, David and Yesenia, for taking time out of your busy schedules, herding
Thank
sheep
you.
and making cheese. And thank you to our sponsors, the Vermont Cheese Council, Heritage Radio Network, the Essex Market, Books Are Magic, all the great people who helped put this together. And we hope that you guys have learned a little bit about cheese and why these wonderful small-scale American cheesemakers are worth celebrating and shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank you,
all.
Ann.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great night.